Okay, let's talk about this connection between autism and nihilism. And I will admit that this concept was abstract for me at first. A few years ago, I began to notice that a high amount of my nihilistic clients were on the spectrum. And so about 2 years ago, I really started to try to understand this connection more and try to make sure that my advice for people on the spectrum kind of was tailored for that. And I just kind of did that more abstractly just so that I could better serve that community. And then in the past month, there was a couple of things that happened. One, my dad and my brother are getting tested for autism, and I have some nieces and nephews that are autistic. And then I had a post on TikTok a couple weeks ago about this concept, the connection between nihilism and autism, and I asked for autistic people to kind of chime in the comment section, and I was just like resonating with a lot of their experience and how they see the world. And then I had a friend of mine who's older than me, a female friend, and she's, I don't know, maybe 45, I would guess. And she recently got diagnosed with ADHD and autism. And I was talking with her and resonating a lot with her experience. So I am 40. I have literally until this month have never considered that I'm on the spectrum. And I promise for the rest of the video, I'm going to go into why there's a link between autism, nihilism, and I'm also going to do 10 like specific kinds of advice that are tailored for people with autism if you are dealing with suicidality and the void and nihilism and depressive realism. So I promise I'll get to that. But if you don't mind me taking just like a few minutes for something personal, I made a pros cons list for things that I may do that may or may not indicate autism. And I'm just kind of seeing like what you guys think and, put your bets in. I'm agnostic as far as like hoping for one result over another. I don't have any inclination or I really just don't know. And I'm not, hoping for one or the other. I just want to know. So my things that for me personally indicate that I may be on the spectrum is I am aware of eye contact. No one's ever called me out on like not doing proper eye contact, but I am like looking, okay, a couple seconds, look away, kind of go like this. I could look back, like I'm aware of what I'm doing with eye contact, and I'm doing it consciously, which apparently is something that neurotypical people don't tend to do. When I was a child, I was a tomboy, and it was nothing to do with gender dysphoria. It was really that I just didn't understand how girls played, and I didn't understand girl language and girl culture. But I really understood like how boys went out and played sports, and that made sense to me. So I had like, this is actually long hair for me. I had super short hair as a kid, kind of boy hair. And I dressed like a boy and I played sports until I really hit puberty, because that just made sense to me. I do have hyperfixation meals. I do, like, if I were left to my own devices, I have like a vegan protein shake in the morning. I have a tuna sandwich for lunch. I have a beef taco for dinner, and I could do that every day for the rest of my life. My clients tend to be autistic. My highly nihilistic clients, more than 50% are on the spectrum. I do tend to be more highly analytical than like the majority of my female friends, but that could just be me wanting to figure things out or having a core value of truth seeking. Like that doesn't necessarily mean autism. I do mask in social situations. Small talk like is very difficult for me, very draining. It's something that I intentionally do. It is draining. It's one of the things I really love about coaching is I can just like skip 10 years of small talk and just be like, hey, like, how's it going being a human over there? And we can skip all that. I really enjoy that. I prefer my own company. That could just be because I'm, introverted, but I do kind of enjoy my own company. I don't feel, sometimes I force myself to go out because there's people that I care about, but I always have to force myself to do so. I took religion seriously when I was in it and kind of like went the apologetics direction. And then I became an atheist when I was out of it. And that is typical for people who are on the spectrum. They're more likely to take religion super seriously when they're in it and then kind of like swing to the other side and be atheists when they leave religion, whereas they're not usually like just kind of in the middle gray space. I do have noise sensitivity. So I don't have them with me right now, but I have like noise canceling headphones. And I do have sensitivity to suffering. Like I was asking questions about the nature of suffering from pretty young. But again, like all of that could be just like being a little bit socially awkward, being introverted. I do rank high in neuroticism by nature, depression, anxiety, being philosophically minded, having core values of justice and truth seeking. So all of that could be explained by other things. Things on my arguments against me being autistic. I don't have a lot of sensory issues. I prefer like comfortable clothing. You mostly see me in hoodies, but that's more just because I don't care. Like I just fundamentally don't care about clothing. Um, More than like I didn't have any like sensory issues as a child. That's a little bit a lie. I don't like socks, so like I never wear socks under any circumstances. Um, but yeah, I don't know if you'd call that a sensory issue. I just don't like socks. Ugh, ugh. I didn't like stack toys as a child or play with trains. I didn't like put my toys in a line. I do understand sarcasm, symbolism, figurative language. I've never gotten lost in any of that. I wasn't delayed in language development. In fact, I was really early in language development, and I was reading by the time I was 4. I don't have any. As a child or adult, I have no like stimming behaviors. So it doesn't seem like I am, but the combination of my family getting tested and attracting so many autistic clients, and then just like learning more as I'm getting older, the differences between men and women on the spectrum, I am going in and getting tested. All of this to say, this was like a huge personal liberty. Um, all of this to say, this used to be an abstract concept for me, but now it's becoming incredibly personal for me as I'm having to do some self-reflection about even myself being on the spectrum. So let's look at the data. And I'm laughing because having a pros and cons list about whether or not I'm autistic and then saying, let's dig into the data seems like a Tylenol behavior, if I'm being honest. Seems like, some tism. But, what am I going to do? So here's some stats of what we know. And the studies are a little interesting. We kind of have to work around it here because there's very few studies that say, are you a nihilist? Because a lot of people just don't even know what that is. And so we kind of have to work around this. So what we do know as far as autism is suicidal ideation and attempts. So in autistic people, the meta-analysis shows that 34% experience suicidal ideation and 24% have had a suicide attempt. And so that is 1 in 4 suicide attempts. That's 3. So autistic individuals have 3 times higher odds of self-harm ideation attempt than their non-autistic peers. They're also going to rate higher in depression and anxiety. Also, that big 5 test for personality types, neuroticism, tends to be elevated with autistic people, especially in autistic adults. I rank high in neuroticism. That didn't come online for me until puberty. I wouldn't say that I was a neurotic child. I don't think I would say that. But by the time I hit puberty, definitely depression and neuroticism. And neuroticism is just your brain's capacity to ruminate about negative things, and it's just spirals about negative things like that. So in the data, we know higher suicidality, higher anxiety and depression, higher in neuroticism. And so what we tend to see with autistic people, it's not just this philosophical nihilism. Oh, there's no meaning in the universe. I'll just create meaning and life is great. We tend to get that personality type with people who are low in neuroticism and high in openness. And so when you tell them there's no inherent meaning in the universe, they essentially take that as like, fantastic. Life is a canvas. I'm just going to paint what I want. Life is great. I'm just going to experience it. And they really do fine. And I don't see them in coaching because they don't really need anything. What we tend to see with autistic clients is not this philosophical nihilism and then life is great. It's this depressive existential collapse where you're doing the math of whether it's worth it or not to be alive. And the mathematical answer is maybe non-being is really preferable to being. And then just complete collapse with that and confusion as to why so many people are ignorant to reality sucking and why they seem so happy with their delusional beliefs and delusional ideas and stupid things that they care about. And and just like that, just kind of driving you insane. And so let's talk about, like, let's go a level deeper here about the possible reasons why autistic people tend to feel this way about life, because there's a combination of factors happening. And of course, when I say autistic people, I'm just going off of the data that we have, and the data is never like 100% of autistic people feel this. That's the problem with trying to say things about neurodivergence. It's like, it's hard to quantify sometimes because that's what makes them neurodivergent. So if one of these things or many of these things don't apply to you, like, that doesn't mean anything wrong about you. It just means it is hard to quantify this. But if we can look at the factors going on with an autistic brain, we can hopefully perhaps try to nail down why you watching this video for yourself or someone you love, why you or that person may be struggling with nihilism. So the first aspect we have to look at is chronic social exclusion. What is the point of living when the world isn't made for you? When people are speaking a totally different language that you don't understand? And so much about what people say is good about life is relationships, love, partnership. And if that's either a foreign experience or rejection when you try, then what's the point? And then along with that, if it takes exhausting energy to mask, to play silly little human games, then even being with people is a cost, not a benefit. And that can take away a lot of meaning that people feel when they are in relationships for neurotypical people. So if, again, if being in relationship is just another cost, then what is the point? Another factor we have to look at is this high in neuroticism piece, which is this tendency to ruminate about negative things. This is spinning into thought spirals and not being able to get out and enjoy life because you're spiraling. And then we also have to combine that with monotropism, which is this deep focus cognitive style. And so your attention locks on to just a few channels. This is why, a typically autistic boy may be able to deeply focus on whatever their hyperfixation is at the time. And so if you have a tendency to neuroticism and you tend to, your brain tends to lock on to just a few channels, and those channels are just like the nature of suffering, how nothing matters, all of those kinds of things, then rumination is like a design feature in your brain. It's not a bug, and it's going to be very difficult for your brain to see outside those ruminating thought spirals. You're essentially going to hyper focus on it. And then that's going to affect how you see the world. Another factor is a lot of the advice for nihilism is to get out of your head. Just get into your body and play and dance and make music and have sex and just really get into your body and experience. But that can also be a foreign way of experiencing life if you are highly analytical and you're disconnected from your body more by nature because you spend all your time analyzing and overanalyzing. And so this boils down to interoception differences between autistic people and neurotypical people. If you have more trouble identifying internal states, then you have fewer visceral moments of this feels meaningful coming from your body, these cues that come from your body, that neurotypical people feel very strongly and can start building their life that way. And they can kind of just like feel their way onto a path of a life that feels inherently meaningful for them. But if you're not getting those signals from your body, it's like you are missing a compass that everybody else has that you don't. And so again, like without this strong body compass, and you're only in your analytical brain where you're thinking about what is meaningful about life on a scale of 1,000,000 years, maybe life isn't meaningful from that scale. And you're just not going to see any point to life from that perspective, because so much of nihilism advice is to build subjective meaning based on what feels inherently meaningful to you, like acting according to your core values, for example. But if you don't have that connection to your body, you're essentially more stuck with less of a compass that other people more naturally have because they have more connection to their body. Another one is heightened sensitivity to hypocrisy and inconsistency, which makes modern life feel intolerably unfair. If you have sensitivity to suffering and you try to quantify the suffering of the whole world, and you quantify your inability to do anything that would change that, it feels like, why live this life when it is so rigged in this direction? Like, why play this game? And then also, like, stay with me, I'm going to have like advice for all these things. But let's just dig into the factors of what may be going on here. Also, just being highly analytical in general just means that you don't get those nice, comfy beliefs that make no sense. You don't get to just like choose to see the world as unicorns and rainbows because you want to. That would be like trying to choose that 2 + 2 = 5. And so it can be super confusing that neurotypical people can just like choose beliefs that they benefit from. Like I love my grandma and I cannot live in a world where I don't see my grandma again. Therefore, I just know my grandma exists. Like that would be more like emotionally driven, and neurotypical people can do that more easily than autistic people can. Being highly analytical means doing the math of the level of suffering and not seeing a way to justify this project of life, but also not being able to see it any other way, or else that feels like gaslighting, which is a lot of times how they feel in therapy, where the therapist is essentially trying to gaslight them into seeing the world a different way, which is difficult to do. Another issue that comes up is executive functioning. So neurotypical people in nihilism coaching feel what inherently feels meaningful, and then they have the executive functioning to make goals, to build a life that they inherently want to experience, and they can actually pull that off. You know, they're connected to their body, they can feel what feels meaningful, they can make goals in their life to really curate a life that they want to experience, and then they're off and running. But if you have a hard time connecting to your body, and then also on top of that, you have a hard time doing the executive functioning to order your life intentionally and follow through, it can feel like nothing matters anyway. So it's easier to just, it can feel like you're never going to be able to follow through with doing all of that work executive function wise. So it's easier just to say nothing matters and shut down. This is especially true for the overlap between autism and ADHD. If you're stuck and also you don't have that executive functioning on board, how can you curate this life that people who survive nihilism talk about, where they, even, people like me who say like, I curated a life that I want to experience. That can be difficult if you're low in executive functioning. So most of my nihilistic clients have some overlap of these things going on. There's like heightened sensitivity to suffering, analytical, feel like therapy is gaslighting them and it doesn't work. I just had a client yesterday who was talking about like she didn't even tell her therapist that she just broke up with her boyfriend because her therapist keeps telling her that she's depressed, and she doesn't really feel that depressed. She just feels like she's having a rational response to reality. And so she can't even feel like she can tell him that, because then he's going to be like, oh, for sure you are depressed. And so she's like kind of choosing how much she wants to show her therapist, because she feels like her therapist is just kind of thinking that she just has a negative view of things, but she feels like she's having a rational response. Anyway, it was super interesting. Then the masking is difficult socially, so you feel more isolated. There's less connection to your body to be able to build from your body out. There's higher neuroticism. There's possible suicide attempts, and the trouble, and then there's trouble kind of doing the goal setting to create the life that's worth experiencing. And so, if you get stuck here in severe shutdown and depression, and then you mask, and that takes energy, which shuts you down more, and then you see the world every day and it's just all confirmation that life isn't worth living, that's the downward spiral all the way to the bottom, where suicide feels like the only way out. But there is good news. If we tweak some of this nihilism advice to fit a neurodiverse brain, and again, this is hard because it's so individual, and so it's hard to make these blanket statements, but we're going to do the best that we can, and you'll just have to listen and try to fit it to your own brain if you're listening to this for you. But autistic people do also get through nihilism and come out the other side, but it can look different than neurotypical thriving post-nihilism. But you can get to the point, this I think is a reasonable goal, that you can get to the point where you can say, I'm glad I got to experience existence, even though it ends. I think that's a reasonable goal to make. We don't have to say that, yeah, if I was a god, I would create the world that way. I still don't believe that. If there was a god, I have problems with that. I would not create the world the way that it is. I have a lot of things that I would change about the nature of reality if I could. But given what the world is, I can get to the point where I can say, I'm glad that I got to experience existence, pop my little head out into the universe. I got to experience some things. And when my ride ends and my turn ends, I'm ready to let it go. And that for me was like a reasonable goal to me. So with that goal in mind, what can we tweak to make nihilism advice more palatable for neurodiverse brains? Always with the caveat that this won't work for all kinds of neurodiversity. That's why it's neurodiversity. Number one, social belonging through autistic friendly forms of connection. So if your social life is just forced masking, then you don't get the benefits of connection. Social exclusion and masking are some of the strongest predictors of suicidal thinking in autistic adults. That's from a study, Cassidy, 2020. Interventions that create autistic affirming spaces, peer groups, online, local meetups, neurodiversity friendly therapy groups, family meetups where you don't have to mask. These can help a lot. What we want to focus on is the kind of connection that removes the need to mask. Even something like 2 hours a week of safe autistic community engagement has been shown to lower depression scores over a 6-month period. And so we're trying to replace fit-in goals with where's a place that I can go where I don't have to mask. At least I don't have to mask so much. I have a few people that I can be myself with, or sometimes I will travel and speak, or sometimes I will teach, which I kind of like personally because it's interactive but doesn't require a lot of masking. Or sometimes I feel connected reading or interacting with people's ideas. It's connective for me without heavy masking. So community needs to look different if you're on the spectrum. I might or might not be on the spectrum, but even so, I think it's really okay that everybody be able to define how they best connect, even if it's not a room full of people. A room full of people is very difficult for me. It's very exhausting for me. But a night in someone's ideas that connects me to other people's ideas, that connects me to other words that people say, that connects me to a YouTube video, that connects me to a TikTok, and then is connected to myself because I'm watching how I'm interacting with this idea. That is actually incredibly connective to me, even kind of social for me, but doesn't require me to mask. So for nihilism advice for neurotypical people is like to get more connected. But if you're autistic and you hate rooms of people, then it's like, no thanks. You need to find ways that you connect that don't require a lot of masking. Number 2, target rumination with ACT and mindfulness. So autistic adults high in neuroticism score the highest on rumination and hopelessness scales. And so cognitive behavioral therapy is going to feel like you're trying to gaslight yourself to see the world differently. And cognitive behavioral therapy often will try to kind of reframe like, oh, that's just a negative thought. That's a negative way to look at the world. Can we see it another way? Can we choose to say, life is good and my life is meaningful and act according to that? And that's going to feel like gaslighting. And so if you try to say in therapy, like, my life is a gift, I'm going to do a gratitude journal, and then you're fighting against your own brain that says this is stupid, it can actually make you feel worse. And so what we have to do is instead acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, which works better for analytical minds. We essentially accept, okay, what if the universe is meaningless? What if there is no justice? What if there is a lot of randomness? What if we don't have free will? What if there's a lot of suffering? What if we actually just accepted that is the absurd situation that we find ourselves in? What do we do with that? What's the action that we respond with? Because what that does is statistically reduce rumination and suicidality, because you just accept this is what is, and then you have to reframe into what is my response to this? What is my response to this reality that I find myself in? And so the frame is, you don't have to change the thought, life is meaningless. You can learn to redirect that with, okay, what am I going to do today to reduce suffering, since suffering seems to bother me so much? What is the character that I'm going to build within this reality simply for the plot? How am I going to act today in a way that best represents how the world should be, even if it's not? Because that's what I committed to, and this is my, what I think is the best response to this reality. So you don't have to change your life is meaningless thoughts. You change your relationship with them by redirecting those thoughts into, how am I going to intentionally respond to this? How have I already chosen that I'm going to respond to this? And that leaves the ruminating and puts you into action and puts you into life, which is going to reduce your suicidality. So this one I really do use all the time. My rule with myself for ruminating, again, autistic or not, I'm high in neuroticism and I love brooding. So my rule for myself is if I learn something new, I'm allowed to think about it and go down a rabbit hole. But if I haven't learned anything new and it's just the same, like honestly, it's like the same fucking thought spiral. Life is stupid. Everything is pointless. Why do people not see this? Blah, 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 blah. If it's the same thought spiral, then I do redirect that. I take that as just information. My brain is very neurotic today. Did I sleep last night? Am I about to start my period? Am I in a fight with my partner? Why is my brain feeling really nihilistic today? This isn't new information. I'm spiraling with the same shit that I always spiral about. And then what is my response to my thought spiral? Now that I have this information that my brain is feeling very nihilistic and ruminating today. Oh, I've already decided this. I really care about my kids, even if the universe doesn't. I care about my work. I care about reducing suffering. And I care about taking care of myself so my brain feels better, because there's an experiential quality to life that I can improve upon. So I'm going to go to work even though I don't feel like it. Because I've committed to reducing suffering in this way. I'm going to then read a lovely book and try to go to bed early. And there's just such a difference between being in the thought spiral and then just receiving the thought spiral as information and then redirecting to how you've already chosen to deal with that thought spiral, how you've already chosen to respond to the meaninglessness of the universe. And so this is one that I do all the time. It's helpful with ACT therapy. You can also, this is what, mindfulness meditation teaches you. It teaches you that all of these thoughts are just information, not necessarily reality. And then you can change how you respond to it. This one I do use a lot. All right, number 3, you've got to work on that body connection and rebuild embodied meaning. Roughly 70% of autistic adults score low on that interoceptive awareness that I talked about, interoceptive awareness inventories. And low scores correlate strongly with anhedonia. Anhedonia is, for me, and I'd have to look more on the data on this, but just intuitively for me, anhedonia is the most dangerous part of nihilism. Because if the advice for nihilism is build meaning based on what feels good for you and what feels meaningful for you, and you feel nothing because your emotions are shut down and your body's shut down, and you've had depression so long that you're not even producing, serotonin or dopamine anymore, that was the most dangerous part of my nihilism, and why psychedelic therapy helped me so much is because it helped me with the anhedonia. That anhedonia was quickly moving me towards, the edge, as we say. It was really frustrating for me at the time because people would be like, okay, there's no meaning in the universe. Just enjoy life. What do you enjoy? And at the time, it was literally nothing. I enjoy fucking nothing. Everything is a goddamn chore. Everything is a distraction from reality. And people would be like, oh, I like volleyball. And in my head, when I'm only in my head, it's like, we're spinning through space. The world is on fire. Children are dying. And these arbitrary rules about this dumb ball in this dumb square is meaningful. That's so fucking stupid. That's how my brain was the entire time of my 2 years in deep nihilism. But when I was able to connect to my body again, and for me that included psychedelic therapy and getting help for depression, then my body could start talking again and feeling again what was inherently meaningful for me. And then I could start building on that. I like deep conversation, so I found a job where I can do that. I enjoy podcasting and writing, so I found more ways to do more of that. I actually do enjoy playing sports. I get a little bit playful when I play sports, a playful side of me, a competitive side for me, which I'm rarely competitive, but it will come out in sports. I love ping pong. I'm hella good at it. And pickleball, I'm at the age now where all sports is really just pickleball, which I think is fun too. I play every Wednesday at a Mormon church. And there's certain people I enjoy texting and sending memes to. And sometimes I like that even more than meeting in person, because meeting in person requires usually some social masking. But I love texting and sending memes to people. It's not just a distraction. I genuinely enjoy it. And so it's this recognition that I am more than just a computer in a brain that is only analytical. I am also a feeling thing too. And this meat suit enjoys some feelings and some experiences more than others. So building my connection to my body, which I really hated to do because I loved being in my head, it really did help me to build more meaning effectively in my life because I had that internal compass on. And so for me, that also included psychedelic therapy to help with the anhedonia. Anhedonia is, that inability to feel joy anymore because you've been depressed so long and you're so shut down. Next one, channeling justice sensitivity into pro-social agency. These are good. I honestly use all of these so far. So heightened moral sensitivity is going to predict depressive realism, where you are depressed because you are actually taking in the actual real suffering in the world. And so when autistic participants in purpose coaching studies redirected that moral outrage towards specific solvable injustices, like I can do this, I can't feed all the dogs, but I can feed this one, then even as short as 8 weeks, they went from the world is fundamentally broken and I'm shut down into feeling like I can fix this one corner. Right? So structured volunteering, even something like 2 hours a week, provides measurable antidepressant effects comparable to low dose SSRIs. And this one saved me in a lot of ways. The way that a therapist explained it to me is, would you yell at a baby if they couldn't run? And I'm like, of course not. And then kind of this question, then why do you expect yourself to hold the pain of the whole world when your nervous system is built to hold like 150 people? And my mental health did improve a lot when I gave myself permission to only hold as much suffering as I can while still showing up in ways that reduce suffering in the world. So that does mean on some days I don't read the news or I don't start my day looking at pictures of dead Palestinian children. Some documentaries I watch and some I check in and I say, I do not have the emotional energy for this one today. And I used to think that was immoral or wrong in some way. I used to think it was copping out if I don't look, and I would force myself to look so that I would fight my own privilege. But I am so incredibly sensitive to suffering that I realized that if I watch this documentary and lay on the couch with an emotional flu for 2 weeks and I don't show up in the world in ways that reduce suffering, then I'm not helping. If anything, I'm hurting things because the world lost everything that I could have done while I was on the couch crying. And so at first it sounded like privilege because there is like, for people who don't look at the suffering of the world enough, it can be privilege because it's like the white girl that says joy is a rebellion, says woman who participates in no other form of rebellion, right? But for someone who is sensitive to suffering, that is actually what we need. We need permission that you are a finite creature with a finite nervous system, just like that baby cannot run, and it's mean to yell at it to do so, that it's then okay to limit how much suffering you hold, or it shuts you down totally. And then it becomes illogical because it's like, oh, I can't save all the dogs, so I'm not going to feed the dog next to me and it's going to starve. Like, what's the logic in that? So what happens? So you wouldn't yell at a baby for running. I'm also not going to expect that I have to save the whole world, because realistically, this is what I can do today. And we can't let perfection be the enemy kind of the good here. And giving myself permission to only hold as much suffering as I'm able to while showing up in the world in meaningful ways really did help my mental health a lot and helped redirect my moral sensitivities. Okay, I'll go through these a little faster. I have 5 more here and then I'll be done. Number 6, protect executive function and outsource that as much as you can. Executive function strain predicts hopelessness independently of your mood. So even like totally independent of your sleep and your mood and how grumpy you are, executive function strain is going to predict your hopelessness, which means you have to work on externalizing the brain's working memory load. So maybe it's 9:00 a.m. I open my planner. That's externalized. It's not dictated by me thinking through it and telling myself I have to do it. It's just, it's 9:00. The clock dictates it. And this is what I do at 9:00. And this is where that autism, ADHD overlap really holds people back, because if you don't have the executive functioning to make your life, the life that you want to live, then you essentially give up on life before you get to experience what your life could be. And that does make me sad when people essentially give up on the project of life before. Like, I would have been sad, like, just for me looking back, I would be sad now if thinking if I would have ended my life when I wanted to, without ever knowing how good life could have gotten. But yeah, you have to do all the tricks that you need to do to get that externalizing to be outsourced, so that you don't have to spend so much time with your working memory load. And this is important because autistic burnout resembles clinical depression, but it responds differently. Clinical depression sometimes will respond to like reframing, but for autistic burnout, it's just rest. Like you're in burnout and overload. So longitudinal studies that came out in 2020 showed that like unmasking windows, sensory retreat periods do a lot of rest, like that kind of rest will do a lot to reset an autistic brain. So you have to build in structured downtime into daily schedules, teach families that solitude is not withdrawal but regulation. And of course the response is like, in this economy, like who has the time to recover? And my answer to that is I can't solve our addiction to capitalism and consumption and the way the world is, but anytime that we can prioritize a good crash, like you've got to try to prioritize that as best you can, or else the body's going to crash on you on its own. It's like telling people, like, if you don't prioritize some exercise whenever you can, if you don't, then your body's going to force you to prioritize that by putting you in the hospital. So like, you just got to do the best you can here. Number 7, sleep and sensory input, like treat it as if it is life-saving, because it is. In autism cohorts, and the studies in these cohorts, each additional hour of nightly sleep lowered suicidal ideation by 14%. And so circadian rhythm hygiene, consistent wake times, happy light in the morning, weighted blankets, ear protection, treat it like it's life or death, because sensory overload is going to elevate your cortisol. It's going to blunt your reward response, and you're instantly going to go into hopelessness. And that hopelessness can go to suicidality. So much of my suicidality, when I spent 2 years being suicidal every single moment of every single day, correlated to when my kids were young and I was low on sleep and they cried a lot. I had one kid that never slept and always cried. And he's actually on the spectrum and has sensory issues, and he just never ate and he never slept, which means I didn't either. And that was my brain, when my brain had its most nihilistic philosophy of life. It felt rational, but a lot of that was honestly just sensory overload and lack of sleep that forces your brain into a state of hopelessness that you really cannot think yourself out of. Number 8, give permission to be super into your thing. Even if it's not social, like we have to expand meaning beyond the social template. So what we see in studies is that these meaning of life inventories show that autistic adults scoring lower on the relationships domain, but higher on knowledge or creativity or moral coherence domains. What it tells us is that you can feel meaning of life being super into your thing, even if neurotypical people would feel isolated just, learning about trains or whatever your thing is. And so you can encourage systemic or intellectual sources of awe rather than like having it be focused around people. So learning, pattern discovery, cosmology, art, engineering, some kind of daily awe practice, watching space imagery, raised well-being scores 20% in neurodiverse samples. And so that sense of fulfillment that you're glad that you got to experience existence. A lot of neurotypical people just feel that being around other people, but you can also feel that by watching videos of your favorite thing about the universe that is interesting to you. And so we look at some people and say, oh, you're isolated, you need to be more social. But if you're really getting awe by reading books about how the universe works, no, just do that. Like prioritize that. That's totally okay if that's how you experience awe. It was a huge gift to myself to allow myself to spend an evening absolutely in complete joy in a room by myself, thinking about some new idea and just giving myself permission instead of this constant pressure that I need to be more social. Because I just like that social aspect is going to be a cost for me. All right, number 9, almost done here. This is one if you're watching this video for a loved one, like a partner or a child, and that's monitoring risk, because autistic suicidality is often non-verbalized, which means we have to rely on behavior metrics rather than someone saying, that they have plans to, that they're having suicidal ideation. So we're watching for sudden withdrawal, routine disruption, self-care collapse. There is a suicidal behaviors questionnaire that is for autism spectrum conditions, and evidence shows that proactive check-ins every 2 weeks reduce crisis episodes by 40%. If someone had known that, like if my partner had known that and checked up on me, they probably would have been able to see how suicidal was, even though at the time I really told no one because I had so much shame about being a young mother and the thoughts that I was having, because some of those were even intrusive, violent thoughts. And I had so much shame around all of that I just never told anyone. Number 10, the greatest improvements we see is when existential philosophy is combined with sensory action. So for autistic people, philosophical insight alone rarely translates into felt meaning. They can understand the logic of purpose intellectually and still be emotionally disconnected from that. I get that from clients all the time. Like, I understand what you're saying about your existential therapy. It's not clicking. Like, it just doesn't change anything for me. And so research on existential therapy, when it's combined with behavioral action, connecting with the body, showing up in the world, service, that kinds of things, that shows the best results for meaning making when you combine that philosophy with embodied action. So the goal isn't to read every single book on existential philosophy until you find some kind of rational meaning of life. The purpose is to get enough existential philosophy to get you to try to engage with life, and then to make your life better each day. Each day you're kind of building a life that you're more wanting to experience. And so this can be done through small structured rituals that link values, or like the philosophy that you're working with, absurdism, existentialism, stoicism, whatever kind of idea that makes sense to you about the nature of reality, and then the action, and then the sensory experience. So if a core value is clarity, take 5 minutes every morning to sit in the sunlight and breathe slowly until your body settles down. If your value is truth, you read a page of philosophy or write one honest journal line before you check your phone. If the value is care, that you really wish, like that moral sensitivity, then prepare a meal for someone or water plants while focusing on the act itself. You have to link the philosophy with an act of felt experience in the body. And neurotypical people can just do the action and then get the feeling. And autistic people can get stuck in just thinking about the action or thinking about the philosophy. And the greatest improvement is when we have existential philosophy, have that acceptance piece combined with how am I going to respond to that, combined with action. And that is curating a kind of feeling with that action, which takes us out of just being computers in our heads and into our bodies and experiencing life, which is good for neuroticism. And even if the universe doesn't care, even if all of that is arbitrary, you are an experiencing thing. It's the one thing that we can know for sure, is that there is a quality of experience to life. Even if we're wrong about everything else, even if we are alien, things on an alien computer, there is an experiential, like the lights are on, there's an experiential quality of life. I can feel that there's a difference between not having my hand on a stove and my hand being on a stove, right? Even if I'm wrong about why, the experience itself, there's a quality to experience, right? And so that means that you can develop a life that is taking your hand off of the stove and doing something that feels really good in your body, but we have to get out of our heads for that. All of this to say, this is not a list of how to gaslight yourself into being an optimist. I'm still not an optimist. I still believe that there's no inherent meaning of the universe. I still tend towards antinatalism. Like I adopted children. I still think that I'm just going to die and there's no afterlife. Like I'm not an optimist. I didn't change any of those things. But what I can say is that, autistic or not, these things helped me personally, and statistics support these interventions too, to be able to say, if life is a movie that ends, there's no need to end the movie in the middle just because you know that the movie ends at some point. There's no need for that. And because there's that experiential quality to life, it is something like to be you. And that's something that we can build on. We can improve the nature of watching the movie so that it's at least a good movie to watch, so that at the end you can say, I enjoyed that movie. And then the movie goes off, and that's enough. It's enough for me to just say, that was a good movie, and now I'm going to bed. That is how I'm living my life. So it's not, for some people that's very dark and optimistic, that's the best that I could do. But it was enough for me to feel like I'm thriving post-nihilism. It was enough for me to say, I'm glad that I get to experience life, even though it's difficult and I wouldn't have designed it for that way. And I just enjoy waking up in the morning so much more now than when I was really extremely suicidal. So I hope you found something in there that's helpful for you and your neurodiverse brain. Next week, I'm going to do nihilism in politics, which is the new FBI term. This is now like a 5-part series on how we're talking about nihilism in the modern world. There's a new FBI term of nihilistic violent behaviors, so stay tuned in for that. And then I definitely want to cover the existential elk theory, which is one of the most interesting essays I've ever read. I read it years ago, and it's circulating online again, and so I want to go over that and talk about that. But as always, stay here for more no-nonsense spirituality and tools for the void.